I'm your host, sabrinasalvati. I'm your host, sabrinasalvati.
All right. Happy Friday, guys. Welcome to Sab's podcast. I'm your host, Sabrina Salvati. My special guest tonight is Dr. Ken Hammond. He is the professor of East Asian and Global History at New Mexico State University. Thank you so much for joining me, Ken.
Hey, very glad to be here.
So I actually was introduced to you recently. There was a video that someone had shared with me of you giving a basic lecture about the history of China. It was actually a series. It's on YouTube, but I think this was from like a couple of years ago. And I started watching that and I was like, I want to see if I can talk to Dr. Ken Hammond, because you seem obviously very knowledgeable about China. And this is a topic that I don't cover as much as I would like to on this show, because I don't know a lot of people that are really well knowledgeable about China, except for Danny Haifong. But I guess I want to get started with this issue with China and Taiwan. About last year, Nancy Pelosi and I want to say Ed Markey decided to make a visit to Taiwan, separate trips. And Taiwan, of course, has been fighting for some type of independence. And I'm curious about this because I was thinking about the one China policy. And why is it that Taiwan now all of a sudden wants to have some type of independence? And how do you feel this is going to affect China and U.S. relations going forward?
Well, the Taiwan question is really at the heart of the tensions between China and the United States right now. It's kind of the flashpoint. It's the major area that the United States has been focusing on in its sort of critical attitude towards China. The one China policy. I mean, it's not just a policy. There's one country. It's China, and Taiwan's part of it. And that's recognized on sort of both sides of the straits. China, the People's Republic of China on the mainland, of course, views Taiwan as a province that has a separate administration right now, but still is part of the country. And on the island, the administration there calls itself the Republic of China. If you buy a map in a bookstore in Taipei, the capital there, it'll show the whole country. It'll show just exactly the same things that are on a map you buy on the mainland. Both sides, say that they are the legitimate government of all of China. Obviously, they can't both be correct about that. But the one China policy is a policy that was agreed upon between the United States and the government of the People's Republic all the way back in 1972, when at that time President Richard Nixon made his historic visit to Beijing and Shanghai in February. And at the end of that, they issued something called the Shanghai Communique, in which, China stated its position, the United States stated its position, and the United States agreed that, there's one country, it's China, and Taiwan is part of it. And so that has been reiterated in a number of later agreements when the United States and the People's Republic established formal diplomatic relations in 1979. That was, of course, part of that agreement. The United States does not legally, officially recognize the Republic of China on Taiwan as the legitimate government. We have this bizarre relationship with the local government on Taiwan. But the official position of the United States is that there's only one China, and Taiwan is part of China. The situation now isn't really all that different than it has been for many years in terms of the actual position of Taiwan vis-a-vis the mainland. The position of the central government is that Taiwan has its own system, its own economic system, its own political system, its own local administration, but it's still part of the country. And they are committed to maintaining that. They have what's called the one country, two systems policy, which is the same thing that applies to the special administrative regions of Hong Kong and Macau. They have very separate administrative systems from that of the mainland. And, the same thing would be the case with Taiwan. The difference in the situation these days is that the United States, which has assumed a very aggressive position towards China, seeking to sort of contain China and roll back China's progress, the United States is using Taiwan as a platform to stir up hostilities, to stir up tensions between the United States and China, but they're trying to manipulate the situation in Taiwan to be part of that. Although in recent elections there, although the Democratic People's Party, the DPP, won the presidency, they didn't do so by a majority. They only did it by a small plurality. But the Kuomintang, which is a unification party, a party that recognizes that it's all one country, they won the majority in the legislature, and so the situation, the political situation on the island is very complicated. No one there officially advocates independence. That would be crossing a red line with China, with the mainland government. But the DPP is seeking to promote a more sort of de facto independent status. And that's really what underpins a lot of the tensions right now.
Very interesting. It does seem like obviously the U.S. is on the side of Taiwan. At least that's what our politicians have said. There's been a lot of fear mongering from our politicians about China. And it doesn't matter if it's the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I've seen both parties fear monger about China. Why do you believe that is? They tend to refer to China as communists, and they tend to use that Red Scare threat, I think, to scare people away. But what do you think the real underlying meaning is for the fact that the U.S. government tends to fearmonger people about China?
Well, the policies directed towards China, the practices that the American government carries out, whether it's sending military assistance and weapons and troops to Taiwan, or provoking China in the South China Sea, or demonizing China with these claims about Hong Kong or about Xinjiang, sort of presenting China as this authoritarian, dictatorial society. These are all measures that are designed to promote an anti-China consciousness amongst the American people. The United States, the political elites in the United States, and you're quite right, on both sides of the mainstream political divide, the Republicans, the Democrats, doesn't matter. They fear China. They do fear China. They fear China's reemergence as a significant economy, as a significant political participant in global affairs, because they see that as undermining the power and the privileges which they have possessed, which they've held for many, many, many years, certainly since the end of the Second World War. And they don't want to surrender. They don't want to give up their position as the dominant power in the world. But China's rise is only part of a larger sort of global reconfiguration in which we're moving from a kind of unipolar world, a world where the U.S. has assumed for itself the right and the power to direct things all over, to be the hegemonic power on the planet. We're moving away from that. That period is over, to one of a sort of multi-centric world. It's not just China, but India, Brazil, South Africa, a number of countries are becoming increasingly important. They're having their own economic development, their own trajectories of modernization. And the United States hates that. The United States elites, they want to hold on to the power and the perks that they enjoy. So they fear China's rise. They fear the changes that are taking place in the world. And they want the American people, even though that's no threat to the American people, they want the American people to fear China, rather than seeking ways in which the United States and China could work together to solve really big, fundamental, existential questions like climate change, poverty, racism, and injustice. There's all these things that we all know are wrong, are terrible out there in the world. But instead of focusing on those, the elites in America are focusing on maintaining their own privileged positions.
Well said. And I think back to a point in this country where we did have majority manufacturing in this country. So we're going back many decades. And I feel like if the U.S. wanted to remain in that position, I think one of the worst things that they did was to send jobs to China. So we have to remember that it's like the U.S. government is trying to punish China for being economically, a competitor of the United States. But they kind of opened that door when they decided to send jobs overseas because they wanted to find ways to make more money and have cheaper labor. So it's almost like China is being punished because of that. I don't know why. I'm sorry. I don't know why this is doing this. Sorry.
I think you're absolutely right about that. China's being punished for being successful at doing exactly what the United States encouraged them to do, except for the fact that China does it in its own way. China does it in a way that's very different from the United States. The United States is, at this point, the classical late capitalist economy where, a small elite of wealthy, powerful people who own, the high ground in the economy are making money. The inequality in the American economy, the redistribution up of wealth produced by working people into the hands of this little elite, that has only accelerated in recent decades. And, we are becoming an increasingly dysfunctional, fragmented, and unequal society. Because we have this capitalist system that has to grow, has to enhance its wealth, has to accumulate capital in the hands of a few, in contrast to China, which has not yet, of course, become a great full socialist society, but is on that path. They're accumulating social wealth in ways that have allowed them in recent years to address problems like the 2008 financial crisis, like the COVID pandemic, lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, beginning to address their climate change problems, which are, of course, part of global problems. So China has a system, a social, economic, political system that is very different from that of the United States. And so, that antagonism is also based on a fear that China's success can potentially become a model that other countries will seek to emulate, and that they will turn away also from the global sort of capitalist system and try to look for alternatives. And that too is seen as threatening by, basically by the capitalist elite in the United States.
When I worked at Boston University, I was an academic advisor, and most of my students were from China, and they weren't interested. Most of them were not interested in getting a job in the United States after graduation. They said, well, no, I can go back home to China and easily get a job because I have a degree from the United States. And they told me like that, a lot of them experienced culture shock the first time coming to the US, because that was the first time a lot of them had actually seen so many homeless people.
Yeah.
And so I learned some of these things from them. Like they explained to me, like, we don't really have this as an issue in China. So somehow China found a way to start to weed out homelessness as well.
Well, that's a fundamental difference, and I agree. When people from China come to the United States and they see, if they're in any real big cities, even in small cities like mine, I live in a little town in southern New Mexico, and we have issues with homelessness here. Although we are, there's a lot of very good work being done around that here, but homelessness is an absurd issue. How on earth can American society, which our politicians constantly tell us about how it's we're the best country in the world and the richest country in the world and all this, and yet we have hundreds of thousands of people who don't even have a place to sleep at night. They're on the streets, they're in shelters. It's a terrible, terrible situation, and that simply does not exist in China. In China, as part of their socialist infrastructure, every citizen, everybody who lives there has what's called a household registration. And what that means is that when they need a place to be, they have a place to be. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody is living where they have their household registration, because people are free to move around. People can go different places to seek employment, seek better opportunities. And millions and millions and millions of people in China do that. But if we look back, for example, to 2008, 2009, when we had this global financial crisis, that really hurt China. Consumer demand in the West just evaporated because, capitalists had ramped up all these speculative financial devices, and those came crashing down. And people lost their homes, people lost their jobs. A lot of people still haven't recovered from that in America. That had an effect in China as well, because 20 million people, well, even maybe a little more than that, lost their jobs in China because consumer demand in the West went away. They simply weren't buying things that were being made in China. Those 20 million people, if that was the United States, as we saw during the crisis, millions of people who were displaced here wound up, without jobs, living on welfare, maybe many of them, out on the streets. But in China, every single one of those people had a household registration back where they had originally lived. Mostly they came from villages scattered around in central China, western China, and they could go home. They could go back there. And the system there guaranteed them housing. It guaranteed them educational opportunity for their children. It guaranteed them health care. They weren't living the life of Riley. It's not to say that they went back and they were living high on the hog. These were basic services. But they were just that. They were basic services, and people had places to go back to. And so they weathered that storm in a way that was so much easier, so much better for them. And within a year, most of them were back in employment. The government redirected a lot of resources towards domestic consumption so that they weren't quite so dependent on the export economy. And people either got jobs back in the factories that they had been working in, or found new places of employment, so that by the end of a year and a half, those 20 million people had been taken care of in the interim and were then getting back into employment. A very, very different experience than what we had in the United States. Homelessness in China is just not something that they would tolerate or they would accept, because it's a society, it's a system that is focused on taking care of the needs of people, just as we saw during the pandemic when China took an economic hit. China, suffered economically from the fact that they devoted so much of their resources, so much of their care to making sure that people didn't die. And so China lost a tiny, tiny fraction of the number of people that we lost. What did we lose? 1.1 million people died in America during the pandemic. In China, even after the relaxation of their controls, fewer than 60,000 people have died, and they have a population 4 times bigger than ours. So the prioritization of the needs of the people means that something like homelessness and something like having over 1 million people die from a needless thing, that just doesn't happen in China.
It's amazing. And one of the things I've pointed out to people before, if we look at the top banks in the world, because this wasn't always this way. If we look at just even the top 5 banks, so they have the previous rank and they have the current rank. The top 5 banks: Industrial and Commercial Bank of China Limited, China Construction Bank Corporation, Agricultural Bank of China Limited, Bank of China Limited, and then you get to the first American bank, which is JP Morgan and Chase. It's really interesting because you'll see in the top 5 banks in the world, China has 4 in the top 5. And what I want people to understand is, like, it wasn't always this way. And this is one of the reasons why I wonder if this is what a lot of the politicians are really upset about, and not so much China is this big, red, scary, country that we all need to be afraid of.
Yeah, I mean, the American people don't need to be afraid of China. A friend of mine was sort of joking with me recently and saying, people are so afraid of China. What would happen? He said, if China, came and somehow took over the United States. And I said, well, first thing they do would build a national network of high-speed rail. I mean, you look at what actually goes on in China, the improvements that have taken place in the lives of the people, the level of technological sophistication and advancement, the things that they're doing, to try to combat climate change and all this. It's so different from the image that most Americans have in their heads, which is fed by the daily propaganda coming out of Washington and out of our media. It's a different world. And yes, it's based upon China's very success. What you said earlier is absolutely right. China's being punished for being successful. But I think the key to that, the reason that they're being punished for being successful, is that for a while, certainly from maybe the end of the 1970s on down until maybe 10, 15 years ago, the American elites believed, they thought, they expected, so they certainly hoped, that China would go through a change, that it would abandon its socialist system, and it would just simply become another capitalist country, and it would become yet another subordinate component of the American-dominated global system, right? And they thought that was sort of inevitable, that if China developed economically, that of course, it would go through this kind of change. But I think it was after the 2008 crisis, after the financial crisis, when they saw how China dealt with that, and they realized that China was actually serious about this project of trying to build a socialist society and economy. That's when President Obama announces what he called the pivot to Asia, and Secretary of State Clinton at that time wrote an article about how America needed to launch a new Pacific century, and then President Trump with the tariff wars, and now the Democrats in the White House, Joe Biden, is just as anti-China as anybody. So, they're across the spectrum of the mainstream parties. They are united in their hostility towards China. The only question is, who's going to be tougher on China, right? And that's not helpful. That's not useful. It's not in the interest of the American people. Just again on this idea of trying to deal with the environmental crisis. China produces the most efficient and the lowest cost solar panels, solar electric panels in the world. They've devoted tremendous research and development to that, and they make great solar panels, and they're very inexpensive. But Americans can't have access to those. The American government, the American political elites would rather slow the process of the adoption of solar energy in the United States than allow China to send those panels over here, to sell those panels over here. When Janet Yellen was just in China, and she lectured the Chinese. She gave them a hard time. They're saying that they had developed excessive capacity, overcapacity in things like electric vehicles and solar panels. Well, we're facing this massive crisis of the planet. We should be devoting everything we can to developing electric vehicles, to developing solar energy, and to sort of wag the finger at China and say, you're doing too much in this area, when we're banning the import of these products that could help us address these issues. It's self-destructive. It's a futile gesture on the one hand, but it's also self-destructive for America's own interests.
And I feel like we also need China. So when I hear politicians, threaten that, whoa, we need to take out China, I'm like, don't we need China in reference to manufacturing and production? Like, what would we do if China wasn't around? Because we don't manufacture as much as we used to in this country.
Yeah, no, I mean, obviously, anybody whoever shops at Walmart knows that without China, a lot of those shelves would be bare. There's a lot of things. They're restricting some of the goods that China can export to the United States, but there's still this vast array of goods that are manufactured in China, produced in China, whether it's your cell phone or your sneakers or whatever it might be. I mean, that's just the nature of the global economy today. American capital, Western capital in general, because of the crises that they got themselves into in the 1970s, they had to find a way to lower labor costs, lower the cost of labor inputs in the production process. So they were looking to ship jobs wherever they could, whether that was Mexico or Bangladesh or China. And China's a huge country with a very, sophisticated working class. And so, a lot of that money went to China to develop productive capacity there. And that's had a hollowing out effect on our economy. It's not China's fault. Those were decisions that were made in the corporate boardrooms and the banking centers of American capitalism. And now, that allowed China to pursue its own economic takeoff. And now their economy, by some measures, is even bigger than ours. Now, their country, their population is 4 times the size of ours. So it's going to keep growing. It's going to get bigger and bigger. Someday, their economy is going to dwarf the American economy because they're good at what they do. They're good at making things. They're good at innovation, creativity. All the things that America, supposedly values, they're doing it better now, and that's driving us crazy. That's driving the political and economic elites here crazy. I think you're quite right that's China's success is not the result of America, but it certainly has been desired, or it was being desired by America. And now that they've achieved so much and they're going on to achieve so much more, suddenly, because they won't play the game our way, we're like, oh, they're bad and we've got to stop them. They're a threat, but they're not a threat to the American people. They may be a threat to the privileges and the special powers of the American elites, but they're not a threat to the American people. And it's just crazy for those politicians to try to paint China in such scary sort of demonized colors.
And that brings me to BRICS. We are seeing more countries choose to fill out an application to join BRICS. Every time I turn around, it seems like it's another country that wants to join. But China, obviously, a huge part of BRICS. What do you predict for the future globally for a country like China and this idea of a multipolar world? And what does that mean for the United States? Because I see us actually being outside of that bubble. I don't see the United States trying to join a multipolar world.
Well, the whole point, of course, of the multipolar development, the way that things are trending, and these are really deep structural changes. This isn't just a few sort of ideas or decisions being made. These are things that are happening largely because the monopoly that the West had for a century and a half, basically, on advanced industrial technologies and productive capacities, that monopoly broke. And now, places like China or Brazil or Indonesia or Malaysia, countries in Africa, South Africa, and others, these are countries that are advancing themselves, and that's what's creating this multipolar world. But a component of that for many countries is their desire to be out from under the domination of the United States. The United States would like to, hold on. They'd like to continue to control basically as much of the world as they can. They were capable of that for a long time, but that's no longer going to be the case. So this emergence of a multipolar system, China is obviously, it's going to be a big component of that. It's this huge economy. It's a huge population. They're going to play a major role in that. But BRICS it's not an organization that China runs or China controls. China is one member. India is another, just as big, now a slightly bigger population, not as developed, not as prosperous as China, but still going to be very important. Russia, China, Brazil, all these countries, South Africa, and now these new members coming in. This is creating a system that hopefully is going to be independent of the domination of the United States. And we see a lot of measures about this, efforts to find new ways to settle international transactions. Instead of all that being controlled and having to flow through the banks in New York, now, a lot of that is being settled directly between countries in their own currencies. A lot of that in the Chinese currency, but others, like Russia's been selling a lot of energy materials to India for payment in rubles or in rupees, and that's getting out from under the domination of the dollar. And as that happens, again, it undermines it reduces the power, the influence of the United States in the world. But from the perspective of the vast majority of people in the world, that's not a bad thing. That's a good thing.
And I'm thinking of the more countries that join BRICS, I mean, what is the U.S. going to do? They can't go to war with everyone.
That's certainly true. Certainly true. They do, of course, if a country, starts to become too independent of the United States, is no longer deferential to the United States. Think of the coup that took place in Bolivia a couple of years ago. That was manipulated by the United States. The taking down of Imran Khan in Pakistan recently. He was certainly not a great fan of China or something like that. They had a workable relationship, but he refused to subordinate Pakistan to American guidance, to domination. One of the American senior officials in the State Department was exposed as having talked about how, well, he's got to go because he won't play the game our way. And the next thing you know, he's taken down. Now he's been imprisoned and demonized, even though his party won the recent elections there by a significant margin. So, the United States is going to do what it can to slow down, to disrupt this process of the emergence of a multipolar order. But it's a fool's errand. It's not going to work because these are, as I say, these are deep structural changes far beyond what politicians say and do and the kind of policies they put into place. You can't, in a sense, to use an overused metaphor, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. This stuff is going forward regardless of what American political elites try to do. But rather than try to figure out how to work with this process and find ways that will be more beneficial to the American people, they're trying to hold on to this kind of now isolationist, my way or the highway attitude that's counterproductive and alienates many of these countries that otherwise might have remained more friendly to the U.S. But when they see how the United States is conducting itself, they stand off and they're like, whoa, this is not a good thing, and we don't want to be part of this.
Well said. And in reference to this war with Russia and Ukraine, I look at it as though Russia is China's neighbor. If I'm guessing, if China had to, if they were pushed to make us take a side, they would probably take Russia's side because they're a part of BRICS. And I just feel like the Biden administration is pushing us closer and closer to World War III. If it's not Israel and Gaza, it's Russia and Ukraine. Now, Iran is in the mix, and it's a very scary time, I think, for people that are paying attention to geopolitics. And I just wonder if it's going to get to that point, if it is going to escalate to a point where China feels they have to get involved, or if the Biden administration is going to try to take us into a further conflict with China.
Well, I think that whether it's Biden or Trump that gets elected in November, the policies of the American government towards China are unlikely to change, and they're very dangerous. They're very reckless, and they do seriously risk actual military conflict, which would be devastating both materially and economically, certainly to Taiwan, significant damage probably to China. That would have a very disruptive effect on the American economy. It would be a disaster for working people in America. But they seem to disregard the seriousness of that kind of threat. The situation with Russia and China is one. Russia and China have very, very different economic and political systems. Russia is certainly not any kind of a socialist society. It has these oligarchs. It has its own way of going about doing things. But Russia and China, as you say, are neighbors. They share a long border. Their economies are highly integrated with one another. They do a lot of trade. There's a lot of resources that pass back and forth between them. And, they also share the desire not to be dominated by the United States and the West. Russia's conflict with Ukraine grows out of the relentless expansion of NATO, this pushing of American-dominated NATO up against Russia's borders. And Russia said over and over and over again, don't do this. Don't do this. We can't accept this. And when, U.S. and NATO went ahead, well, they didn't. Russia didn't accept it, So, the idea that somehow Russia is the demon here, that's based again on a kind of inversion of the actual history, the actual developments that have taken place. And now, right now, I was listening to news earlier today and to Biden's, macho strutting about Iran. What's amazing is this seems to be such a cynical ploy to divert attention from what Israel is doing in Gaza, from the genocide that the IDF is carrying out in Gaza. Now suddenly, we have to worry about the boogeyman of Iran, even though there's no conflict taking place there. Israel, bombed the Iranian embassy in Beirut and killed senior Iranian leaders. And Iran has said somebody's going to have to pay a price for this. That's a rhetorical gesture. There may be something that's going to happen. But this idea that suddenly all the news media are going to pay attention to, the Iran-Israel conflict, rather than, talking about the genocide that's going on every single day. Tens of thousands of people, the vast majority of whom are just children, being killed by the IDF, in this relentless campaign to destroy a Palestinian society and any possibility of a Palestinian state. It's so cynical. It's so manipulative. It just makes you want to, I don't know, tear your hair out or something. But it's something that the Biden administration is going forward with, just as Joe Biden has been a relentless supporter of Israel, a relentless supporter of this genocide in Gaza, and yet tries to present himself as some sort of democratic friend of the people. He's not a friend of the people of Gaza. He's not a friend of the Palestinian people, and he's not a friend of the American people.
That's right. One more question for you, Ken. I was reading that you went to Kent State, I believe, during the time when there were protests at Kent State. I just want to pick your brain about this in reference to direct action in this country. I read somewhere that we need 5% of the population to actually create a mass movement in this country, whether it's over class issues, whether it's over the war in Gaza, etc. What do you feel is different when you look at direct action and protests today compared to, back then with Kent State, et cetera? Because you guys didn't have social media back then. And it drives me crazy a little bit, because I know because we have social media, we can increase our numbers. But it seems like I look back at videos from decades ago, and you guys were able to get hundreds and thousands of people out in the street, and you didn't have social media. So I'm just curious, like, how do you feel about creating movements in this country compared to decades ago?
Well, I mean, in the 60s, especially the second half of the 60s, the crises that we were facing in the United States kind of came together in some interesting ways. You had the Black liberation struggle, you had the resistance to the war in Vietnam, you had anti-poverty struggles in many of the cities all across the country, and those things reinforced each other. And you had a lot of young people who, had like myself, who had been raised in this expectation, this vision of the United States, this sort of, a 50s TV vision of everybody being, one big happy group hug. And as we matured, as we got into college and things like that, and as we saw what was happening in the country and what the United States was doing in Vietnam and in the Caribbean and things like that, and the repression that was being brought down against movements like the Black Panther Party and the rebellions, the spontaneous rebellions in cities like Newark and Cleveland and Detroit, our consciousness was forcibly raised. And I think that generated a mass movement. As you say, you need a significant chunk of people. You don't need a vast majority, but you need enough people to be in the streets, to be doing the work of building organizations, of fighting for the things that they believed in. These days, I think that our movement is growing. I think that more and more people are seeing the problems. There's no shortage of contradictions, no shortage of problems. We still have this horrible racism in our country, poverty in our country that's only gotten worse, inequality that's only getting worse day by day. We are involved in these wars overseas, mostly by proxy, but we are the power that's driving all this conflict in the world, whether it's Ukraine or Syria or, the horrible destruction that we inflicted on Iraq and Afghanistan, our engagements in Africa, our engagements in Latin America. We are the American government and the American military. We are the biggest problem in terms of the safety of people on the planet, in that sense, in history. And so, there are plenty of issues. There's no shortage of issues. And people are mobilizing. People are activists around these. What we need is a unifying force that brings lots of these disparate movements for gay rights, movements for women's liberation, movements for for union organizing, movements for the environment. We need something that draws those all together into a common cause, into a common force. And I think that there are people working towards that. I'm involved, with the Party for Socialism and Liberation, and that's an objective that we have. We're by no means the only group doing that kind of stuff, but I think that that's what was at the heart of the 60s. That whether it was Black liberation or anti-war or anti-poverty or movements for various kinds of social justice, we understood and we argued that you couldn't solve those problems one by one. You couldn't solve them in isolation from one another. You needed a systemic critique. The problem was capitalism. The problem was, the system that dominated the country. And to solve these problems, we need to change the system. And there's more and more people now who are understanding that, who are organizing around that. But that's the kind of thing we need to build. Social media is a great vehicle for doing that, but people in the streets, people organizing, people building their movements, that's what has to come together. But I do feel optimistic that those things are happening, and that we just need to keep doing the work.
I hear you. Thank you so much, Ken. Thank you so much for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye.
Bye-bye now.
All right, guys, that was Dr. Ken Hammond. He is very well versed about China. He is a professor at New Mexico State University. Check him out on YouTube. There's a number of videos of Dr. Hammond giving lectures about China. That's actually how I found out about him. I saw a video of him giving a lecture about the history of China. So definitely check that out. Really informational there. And what is up, guys? Let's start us off right by hitting the like, smash that like button. And I don't know about you guys, but the weather has been crazy here, okay? 1 minute it's a little humid, 1 minute it's a little cold. So I didn't even know if I'm supposed to wear short sleeves today or long sleeves, but here I am. Here I am. All right, guys, we do have more stories that we are going to cover tonight. I want to go ahead and give a shout out to Sabby patrons. I'll get to the comments and then we'll go over that wonderful thumbnail for you folks. All right. Shout out to everyone who is a Sabby patron. Thank you guys so much for your support. If you're interested in being a patron, I have 5 categories: ultimate, Sabinators. There's also Sabsters. Don't forget about those Sabbies. I can't do anything with my hair today. God, this humidity is a mess. Sorry, guys. Sabbies, thank you so much. And of course, members. All of their names are featured on the ticker at the bottom of the screen. And I also want to give a special shout out to new Sabby patrons. I already shouted out the first 3 last night, but a special shout out to Stephanie A. Welcome and thank you. Dun, dun, dun. I hear you, Gamer. Gamer says, yeah, I hate humidity. Yeah, God. I got to tell you, for those of you that live in states that have low humidity, kudos to you. Kudos to you. Maybe this is why some people like to live on the West Coast, right? Because you guys don't have high humidity. Here on the East Coast, we have high humidity. Come summer, hair turns into poof. Okay? Turns into poof. Let's get into some of these comments here. PB World says, so glad you got Professor Hammond. Yeah, he's awesome, guys. Thank you, JM, for the super chat. Any thoughts on how average Taiwanese people feel about the mainland? Oh, that's a good question. I should have asked that. That is a good question, JM. I am going to screenshot this and try to get a response to that. Good question. Humanitarian says, cool guess. I just saw Ken give a lecture in person on Tuesday. Oh, awesome. Thank you, Gorgeous, for the super chat. Hi. I voted for Trump twice and I will vote for him again. Love your content. I agree with a lot of your positions. You are awesome. Working people unite. And I see you are playing the drums. Shout out to Sir Bikes a Lot. Our elites can't beat China. It means putting Americans back to work. Imagine that. Ouch. I'll take those comments on Rockfin, Eric. And then we'll dive into the thumbnail. This humidity is for the birds, man. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Dave. Nice to see Sabby and Eric kicking ass and taking names and moving to name important things. That's actually in a Rihanna song. I'm kicking ass. I'm taking names. All right, guys, what else are we going to discuss tonight? Let's go ahead and share that thumb for you. Dun, dun, dun. All right, ladies and gentlemen, tonight we are discussing Tucker Carlson attacked, and this time not by the left. Oh, that's the funny part. Not by the left. We're also going to discuss Cory Booker and Raphael Warnock fail. We're going to reveal something about the two of them. They seem to think that they are slick, but they are not getting one over on me. We're also going to discuss CNN exposes the IDF via their own investigation. You'll see their CNN host, Aaron, there, and there's also Netanyahu behind her. I've been waiting to cover this story. And last but not least, of course, Ken Hammond was here to talk about China and U.S. relations. Dun, 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 dun. All right, guys. So let's get started. I think I got all the comments. Oh, thank you for the super chat, Drew. China's great, especially during the lockdowns. Thank you for that. All right. They weren't great here in the U.S. Who was I just talking to? Drew. They weren't great here for those of us in the U.S. Keeping it honest about that. Okay, let's dive into our first story here. Cory Booker recently had an interview on CNN about Israel's assault on Gaza, and that is how I will continue to refer to it because that's really what we're dealing with here. And it made me realize something else. I've talked about Cory Booker's, his financial, issues, his donation issues before in a video I had called Expose about Cory Booker. Well, there's something else I want to talk about and dive into with him as well. And also Raphael Warnock. He's another one that I think people do need to keep their eye on. These are two particular politicians that have basically been propped up, and I mean that willingly, propped up by the Democratic Party. And they are kind of seen as Black people that are supposed to represent Black people, and they're going to represent us in the Senate and in the House. But they are actually, signing on and approving legislation that is not really benefiting us. I've mentioned this before about Warnock, how he decided not to vote on key legislation that is important. And I've told you before about Cory Booker. They have decided to put the state of Israel first. And they're not alone. There's also Richie Torres. There's also Hakeem Jeffries. There's a number of them. But I want to get started with this recent interview here. Shout out to Case Study QB for this. Cory Booker on CNN. And for those who are not aware, Charles Barkley and Gayle King, Charles Barkley, former basketball player, and Gayle King, also known as Oprah's friend. Gayle was also a lawyer, but I'm just saying she's known as Oprah's friend. They actually have their own little show on CNN. Weird how that works, right? And they'll bring politicians on every now and then to talk about politics. Listen to this. This is Cory Booker's interview on CNN, Gayle King and Charles Barkley.
Israel, of course, is an ally. We all know that. But there's also a lot of concern about the humanitarian efforts that are happening there, or a lot of innocent civilians who are losing their lives. You've been very vocal about your support. You still feel that way?
Look, if you could look at what's happening in Gaza or Ukraine or Haiti or Sudan right now and not be torn up, not having to anguish your heart, then I don't know if you really have full humanity. We're a country right now that is witnessing hunger and suffering of innocent people in Gaza, as well as in a lot of other conflict zones. And this.
We're going to pause right here. Suffering of people in Gaza and people who are starving, right? Why are they still referring to Israel as an ally? Because I don't know about you guys, but my allies don't starve people. My allies don't make videos of themselves making racial slurs about Palestinian people. My allies don't behave that way. My allies wouldn't block humanitarian aid from getting to people that need it the most. So that's the first thing we need to take away from this conversation.
This is a tough time to lead. But President Biden on the world stage right now has stepped up in ways that have earned him the respect of our allies and peers all across the globe. Just talk to European leaders about what we're doing in Ukraine. And right now he is, and not him directly, but his team is negotiating between the terrorist organization Hamas and Israel to bring an end to this. He's called unequivocally, let's bring about a ceasefire, release of hostages, cessation of hostilities, open the gates to...
Pause. We're going to go back to the Ukraine part. This part's important right here because I want to show you what he's trying to do.
I don't know if you really have full humanity. We're a country right now that is witnessing hunger and suffering of innocent people in Gaza, as well as in a lot of other conflict zones. And this is a tough time to lead. But President Biden on the world stage right now has stepped up in ways that have earned him the respect of our allies and peers all across the globe.
Pause. So that part right there, President Biden earning respect of our allies all across the globe, right? So if they are your ally, shouldn't you already have their respect? Does that mean that little tidbit there from Cory Booker, does that mean that they did not respect Joe Biden from the beginning, from the get-go? Shouldn't they already have respect? Yeah. See, I'm really good at reading people. And Cory Booker seems pretty nervous in this discussion. Now watch what he does. Watch the pivot.
Just talk to European leaders about what we're doing in Ukraine.
He wants to bring up Ukraine. Talk to European leaders about what he's doing in Ukraine. Gaza has nothing to do with Ukraine. People starving in Gaza has nothing to do with Ukraine. These are two separate issues, but he wants to pivot to that because there's not really a lot that you can say in reference to what Joe Biden has done for the Palestinian people in Gaza. Because as long as they're like, he called for a ceasefire, temporary ceasefire, by the way, that doesn't mean anything if you're still giving the state of Israel weapons to continue to slaughter the people. Well, he called for humanitarian aid to increase in Gaza. That doesn't mean anything if the aid is not getting in. So at that point, what should have happened is that President Biden should have decided to break all relations with Israel completely. Break all of it. We're giving them money every year. They're giving them weapons. That is what should have happened. But because Biden and any other of these politicians in DC are not willing to hold Israel accountable, they continue to do what they want to do. Let's bring back in Big-Eyed Cory.
And right now he is, and not him directly, but his team is negotiating between the terrorist organization Hamas and Israel to bring an end to this. He's called unequivocally, let's bring about a ceasefire, release of hostages, cessation of hostilities,
He's
open
called
the
upon
gates
that, Cory,
to...
but it still has not happened. That's what I think is so frustrating for so many people.
I think it's frustrating for I think anybody who looks at it feels frustrated to see the kind of death and destruction in Gaza, the kind of violence that was endured by Israel, the worst.
Pause. What Gail did there, what Gail was trying to do was like, okay, Cory, yes, he called for these things to happen, but it hasn't happened. Israel is still doing whatever they want to do. They're not listening to the United States. So Cory doesn't know what to do from there. So he goes to, oh, but those hostages that they have, you know, that Hamas has and da-da-da. No, because what that does is that shows that Joe Biden is not an effective leader. Let's take a step back, guys. How many of you have had a job where you had a manager where they were your manager, but they really couldn't lead? Have you guys? I think everybody's had at least one. Raise your hand if you've had a job where you have had a manager where they were given that job of manager, but they actually could not lead. Just because you are president of the United States doesn't mean you are good at leading. Think about that. So when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to a lot of these conflicts that have happened under Biden's presidency, he's not good at leading. Joe Biden doesn't even know where he is half the time. Let's continue on here. Death
and destruction in Gaza, the kind of violence that was endured by Israel, the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust, the hostages, including Americans that are being held. These are not easy issues, and they shouldn't be judged on the politics of them. They should be judged on the work that needs to get done to resolve this conflict. And I'm grateful that President Biden is standing in the saddle in a very difficult time to lead globally, making tough calls and trying to drive this conflict to a resolution, to end the violence and resolve the situation in a way that ends this punctuated violence we've had there, whether it's what we just saw or the attacks on Israel in 2014 or what.
Let's pause there because he's going into word salad. Let me make something very clear. Famo says Sab ain't lying. Let me make something very clear, okay? When I'm talking about people having the ability to lead, and Cory is trying to skirt around the issue, right? Like he's talking about what's a very difficult time right now to lead. Doesn't matter. Leaders get things done. When you're in a leadership position, it's not always going to be easy. You think you're always going to have, an easy time? No, there are going to be difficult situations. There is going to be conflict, but real leaders know how to get things done. And this is one of those times where people can point to Joe Biden and they're starting to scratch their heads and they're saying, why isn't he getting this issue done? It's not just Gaza. Yes, it's also Ukraine and other things as well. But the point is, what it is showing you is that the person that we have sitting in the White House right now is not a good leader. regardless if you are Democrat or Republican. I think we could all pretty much agree on that. And that's why we have some of these issues that we have. Now, let's go back just a little bit because he starts to get into a bunch of other stuff. Okay.
Standing in the saddle in a very difficult time to lead globally, making tough calls and trying to drive this conflict to a resolution to end the violence and resolve the situation in a way that ends this punctuated violence we've had there, whether it's what we just saw or the attacks on Israel in 2014 or what.
Now he wants to go back to the attacks on Israel in 2014. So first of all, again, making tough calls, that is part of being a leader. Sorry, but you're in a leadership position, every now and then you're going to have to make some tough calls. If Biden wasn't up to that, probably shouldn't have taken the job. Just is what it is. But he's going back to Israel 2014. Listen.
Hamas and Iran and their proxies have been doing. This is tough times, and I understand the political ramifications, Gail, but this is really a time that should pull on our humanitarian heart. We need to get a lot more humanitarian aid into Gaza.
So he was willing to go back to 2014 in reference to Israel. But every time it comes to what's happening to the Palestinian people, this all started October 7th. So if he can go back to, previous years with Israel, he can revisit previous years with the Palestinian people. So that's a revealing moment, folks. We'll show you why Cory is saying what he's saying.
But it also should pull on our larger ideals. As a guy who's traveled to the Arab countries in that region, from Egypt to Saudi Arabia to the UAE to Israel, everybody says, ultimately, we have to end the terrorism of Hamas, Iran, and their proxies. And
all those countries that he just mentioned, sorry to keep stopping, all those countries he just mentioned, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Egypt, they are all on the side of the United States. Remember that. Remember the ones that he's mentioned.
To the Arab countries in that region, from Egypt to Saudi Arabia to the UAE to Israel, everybody says, ultimately, we have to end the terrorism of Hamas, Iran, and their proxies, and ultimately get to a two-state solution where the Palestinian people have dignity and security and autonomy, and Israel has their security and autonomy as well. And that's what the Biden administration is really working towards.
Okay, and there goes the big eyes that reemerge, right? So Cory Booker is a really good BSer, right? Okay, so let me show you something about Cory, right? So we're going to go back in time. Max Blumenthal actually tweeted this out. Remember this, okay? So Max Blumenthal tweeted this October 13th last year. Pro-Israel millionaires brought Cory Booker into Newark to sell the city off to the highest bidder. Now he's rattling off talking points fed to him by AIPAC donors, painting apartheid Israel's war of extermination as an anti-fascist civil rights sit-in. Listen to this.
Hamas, terrorists, ISIS-like, Hitler-like folks who hate Jews and want to kill them. It's because we cannot let these terrorists, this ISIS-like, Nazi-like people win. And that's why the debate in America should not be a debate. We should have a crystal clarity to support Israel and to call out these Nazi ISIS-like folks who are targeting civilians with an attempt not just to kill and murder Jews, not just to kill and use Palestinians as human shields. To me, there should be no confusion about this for Americans.
All Zionists and AIPAC talking points. Now, why can't he call out the Israelis, the settlers, not just the IDF, but also the settlers that are destroying Palestinian homes in the West Bank? So let's pivot from Gaza and let's go to the West Bank, right? If you're conflicted about Gaza, this is why I get upset when people say it started October 7th. Why not make those same type of assumptions or those same types of accusations towards the Israelis that are burning Palestinian homes in the West Bank, that are kicking them out of their homes, and that have those illegal settlements there? Why not make that? You can't make those kind of claims when you're in bed with AIPAC and you're getting a lot of money from them. So the point that I'm trying to make is that people like Cory Booker, people like Warnock, what they do once again, these are people that they're black. Yes, they're black. But they're not in Congress to fight for people in the Black community. Hell, they're not even there to fight for people, just Americans, period. They have been bought and paid for to fight for the state of Israel. Same thing with Richie Torres. He fights harder for people in Israel than he does for people in the Bronx. And that's just a reality, folks. So they get guys like Cory Booker. You see him on TV like, hey, that's a Black guy. He's out there representing us. Don't look into the background and see that Cory Booker again went to Stanford, that they pull all these types, went to Stanford. You were a lawyer, tells the sob story about how his parents experienced housing discrimination when they were trying to buy a house in New Jersey. And that is how he's supposed to connect with you. Moves into a poor neighborhood in Newark, New Jersey to show you that he's down and he is one of you. This is all a game. Meanwhile, the entire time that he's in office, he's not fighting for the same people that the neighborhood that he moved into. Let him continue.
And I'll say this, not just as a United States Senator, not just as a patriot who would die for my own country, but I'm going to say this as a Black man. When you're Black in America, you understand the vulnerability within your own country you love.
Here it comes, right? So you would think he's making this statement and this is actually going to be connected to the Palestinian struggle. Nope.
I saw it as an adult on January 6th. Just like the Nazis, who didn't just destroy 6 million Jews, they destroyed gay people, gypsies. I will stand with people who are targets of hate. Hamas, like the Nazis and like ISIS, are people who target with hate.
Nazis had power, right? Didn't they have some form of power at that point in time? Weren't they in power? Okay. Hamas is not in power. The Palestinian people are not in power. The Israeli government is. The state of Israel is. The IDF has more power. Israel has a military. Gaza does not. I mean, do you see what he does there? As a Black man living in the United States, this is what they do. Now, he could have used that line and applied it to the Palestinian struggle, because when we look at the struggle, actually the Black struggle in the United States is more aligned with the Palestinian struggle. But you can't do that when you're in bed with the Israeli lobby, like Cory.
I stand with Jews. I stand with Muslims. I stand with gay folks. I stand with people right now who all have a common cause to stand against Hamas. The same hate that killed Blacks in a church in South Carolina are the same people who are wielding the same hate that killed in a synagogue. And so
Hamas is now compared to Dylan Roof.
We all need to take an understanding. Everyone has a responsibility to condemn the hatred of this ISIS Nazi-like Hamas.
So I think you guys see where I'm going with this, because we're going back in time, or we're going all the way there. Max Blumenthal brought up another receipt. This inspiring protest reminded me of the time that Netanyahu pal Jared Kushner co-hosted a fundraiser for Cory Booker, one of the biggest AIPAC tools the Senate has ever known. Did you guys know about this? Did you know that, look at this, Trump to host fundraiser for Booker? That was July 16th of 2013. So you see what I mean when I tell you, when it comes to money, there's no difference between these two parties. Now, he can get up there and make all those speeches about Trump and speeches against the Republican Party, but here he is. He had no problem when it came to raising money, rubbing elbows with them. No. Money doesn't see party. You get that, guys? Money doesn't see party. So that's who Cory Booker is, right? And then this was the speech in New Jersey when he was interrupted, which he needed to get. This is what happens.
I want to call out to everybody right now, these final hours, this is what's on the ballot. We should know in New Jersey how privileged we are. There are so many places in our country right now where people want to make sure that we have. This is what makes America great. The power to protest. The power to have free speech. The power of America.
I had to mute it because the music starts to come on. But, you know, he says, oh, this is what makes the America so great. The power of free speech. So that was protesters confronting Cory Booker. And Cory Booker, he's just so fake. He's just the fakest of the fake, but he's a part of the Black misleadership class. Cory Booker is not there fighting for us. In fact, Cory Booker actually attended a meeting with an AIPAC meeting where he actually explained to them how to recruit Black people. Listen to him sell us down the river. Let me make sure I got on the captions for this because I think okay, there we go.
Could you give us your own evaluation of the African-American leadership in the United States and what is their feeling about Israel? And, you know, because oftentimes I think locally, outside of New York, we find that there is become a greater identification, not with the history of Israel and what Israel has become, but with the sufferings of the Palestinians without any, you know, really understanding of the history with Israel. So could you comment on African-American leadership?
Well, Blacks will always.
So this was a couple of years ago. Cory Booker tells AIPAC how to recruit African Americans. And look at this. This was uploaded 5 years ago by Zayed Giuliani. Okay, so pay close attention to this, because what they said to him is that they are noticing that there is a growing, you know, increase of solidarity from the African American community with the Palestinian community. So they're asking Cory Booker, how do we get around that and how do we recruit more Black people? So here is Cory Booker being a whole ass, he being a house Negro. Listen.
As Jews are, I think, always going to be some of the first to sign up to address the suffering of others. And we shouldn't be afraid of that within the Black community, the Jewish community, whatever community. But when it comes to justice for Israel and understanding any suffering within context, we need to be more vigilant than we're being right now. And I look, the Black community in many ways, I argue, I just was a speaker for the ADL's annual dinner. We always argue, every time I meet Abe Foxman, I always ask him about his studies of Black anti-Semitism, and is it higher than American anti-Semitism as a whole? We have interesting discussions, but if you live in the American world, there are streams within America, and many of them are streams within the mainstream that are racist and that are or have anti-Semitism in them. So we have to always be on guard to vigilantly fight against those streams. Is there streams of anti-Semitism in African American life? Yes.
You hear this? So you guys hear this? What he's telling them? Okay, like. This is, thank you, Giovanni. It is simply disgusting. Like, why are you even in this conversation, right? Why are you telling them this? It goes on.
Is there streams of racism or bigotry in Jewish life? Yes. So my point is not, that's a given. The more important question to me is, what are we who are validly against that? What are we going to do? And so within the Black community, and I say this all the time, and you ask specifically about Black leadership. First of all, this excites me like never before, because Obama is a raindrop compared to the storm that's coming of young Black leaders around this country.
You guys hear that? He said Obama is a raindrop compared to the storm of Black leaders that's coming around this country. All the people that Cory Booker and friends have tapped on the shoulder to come in and do their bidding, right? So that's people like even Afro-Latino, people like Richie Torres could have been a part of that group. You see how this works, folks? So these people are already selected. They already tapping these people in on the shoulder, and you think they're going in there to help and advocate for their community. They're not.
Who are phenomenally qualified, phenomenally experienced. You're going to see more Black governors, you're going to see more Black senators, you're going to see more African-American CEOs.
Listen, he said you're going to see more Black governors, senators, CEOs, but he's not talking about people just, earning those positions. He's talking about Black people going into those positions to serve AIPAC. You guys see this? He's talking about Black people going into those positions to serve Israel, not to serve the Black community. He already letting them know. Let me let you know who's coming down the pipeline.
This next generation is coming up behind my parents' generation. It's incredibly qualified, incredibly competent in making many moves. So my only hope is with that, and so the people like to think that one Black person speaks for all Black America, which is so offensive to me in many ways. So I'm sorry, Jesse Jackson doesn't speak for me. Al Sharpton doesn't speak for me. It's just there's as much diversity within the Black community, dear God, as there is diversity within the Jewish community. 2 Jews in the town, we have 3 synagogues. Okay, so that's the reality that there is. So the only thing I can say is that this next group of African Americans are very visionary, very much full of hope, very value-based, as I know them. Harold Ford's, Arthur Davis's, and many other people that AIPAC knows. And the only thing I think I think that AIPAC it's critical that you continue to find, not them when they're Congress people, you find those.
Listen to what he is saying. I think it is important, not when they're, let me go back just a little bit because I think I skipped over it. The Congress people part is important.
Not them when they're Congress people. You find those Black leaders when they're 22-year-olds at Oxford, when they're 24-year-olds as a city council president, and you go to them then and say,
you hear this? So he was basically telling them, this is how you recruit Black people. You don't find them when they're already congressmen or congresswomen. You find them when they're in their early 20s, which means they're tapping some of these people or finding some of them when they're in college. And here is House Negro Cory Booker telling them exactly how to do it, giving them all the tools. Isn't this crazy? Get them when they're young. That's what he's saying. He said city council president, so you can find him as city councilors.
Israel. Let us start showing you what this is about. That's what a key mission of AIPAC that we must continue, which is finding future leaders, young leaders in America. I'm at the Aspen Institute. They've done a great job. They have this young leaders group. That whole group should go to Israel. These are kind of things that need to be done ultimately for us to combat that. But please, I appeal to Jews all the time. Please do not think that there are, just because such and such a Black leader gets up there, whether it be Reverend Wright or whomever, and says something stupid, like many leaders, period, do, and spread that around for the entire Black community. As much as Jews would never want to be held responsible for everything Shmuel chaos.
So there's Cory Booker meeting with AIPAC, telling them, let me tell you how you get Black people. Get them when they're young. Don't wait until they're Congress people. Oh, and then also take them to Israel. The sellouts sell out. You see how that works? Again, Black misleadership class, but he's not alone. There's also Raphael Warnock. Now I want to show you a speech that Raphael Warnock made about Palestine in support of the Palestinian people. Now, this was prior to his election. This is before 2020. Let's go ahead and bring in this. And I want you to tell me if this sounds like the same person today. Listen.
It's been a tough week. The administration opened up the U.S. Embassy in Jerusalem. Standing there, President's family and a few mealy-mouthed evangelical preachers
members of the Knesset, members of the IDF,
who are responsible for the mess that we found ourselves in,
the executive branch of the United States government,
both there and here,
to welcome the leader,
misquoting and misinterpreting the scripture, talking about peace. Meanwhile, young Palestinian sisters and brothers who are struggling for their very lives, struggling for water, and struggling for their human dignity, stood up in a non-violent protest, saying if we're going to die struggling. And yes, there may have been some folk who were violent, but we ought to know how that works out. We know what it's like to stand up and have a peaceful demonstration and have the media focus on a few violent uprisings. But you have to look at those Palestinian sisters and brothers who are struggling for their human dignity, and they have a right to self-determination. They have a right to breathe free. We need a two-state solution where all of God's children can live together. If we can't live together in the holy city, what in the world are we talking about? We hear everybody, Arabs and Cretans, isn't that what the text says? Speaking about God's deeds of power, but we saw the government of Israel shoot down unarmed Palestinian sisters and brothers like birds of prey. And I don't care who does it, it's wrong. It's wrong to shoot down God's children like they don't matter at all. And it's no more anti-Semitic for me to say that than it is anti-white for me to say that black lives matter. Palestinian lives matter. We need a Pentecostal moment.
Great speech there. That is from Reverend at the time, Reverend Raphael Warnock. That was before he was elected to the U.S. Senate. So that was, of course, prior to October 7th, way before October 7th. Now, let's see where he is today. Okay. Senator Raphael Warnock has received greater than $928,000 from the pro-Israel lobby since elected in 2020. Warnock voted for the spending bill that cut UNRWA funding and consistently votes for unconditional military aid to Netanyahu. He currently has 0% score on the Congressional Democrat Palestine tracker. You should follow this account on Twitter. They are tracking AIPAC. So after that one, awesome speech from Warnock, once he ran for office, starting in 2020, they got him too. Another member of the Black misleadership class. And that's why you don't hear him saying anything about it today. And you won't hear him saying anything about it tomorrow. That's how easy they can be bought. Just like that. If he is your representative, maybe you should reach out to his office and ask him why he's taking money from AIPAC. And so if you follow this account on Twitter, they're tracking everybody. It's not just Democrats. They're tracking Democrats and Republicans. It is the AIPAC tracker. You follow these guys at Track AIPAC. They're serious. So if you follow them, you'll be able to see they got Marco Rubio. I love how they made these pictures for everybody. John Fetterman. And we can go on. But follow that account on Twitter because they're exposing them all one by one. Harriet Hageman, going on. The Black misleadership class. And what's frustrating to me is that kids, they will see a Cory Booker and they will see, Raphael Warnock, and they'll look up to them. And, it's just like when kids looked up to Obama and they said, oh, a Black guy is president. That means there is hope for me. So people will look up to Cory Booker and Raphael Warnock, not realizing what they did to get to where they are. Just like Oprah. I told you this. People look up to Oprah, not thinking about what she did to get to where she is. So that's the problem. People will see them as pillars of the Black community. Meanwhile, while they are in office, they are voting on legislation that is not in favor of the Black community, but is in favor of the state of Israel. They talk a good game. They've been coached to do so. Raphael Warnock, this is the guy. I mean, let's go back, guys. Let's do some thinking. This is the guy, right? Isn't this the guy that Joe Biden told you to vote for so you can get that $2,000 check? How'd that work out for some of you? How'd that work out? Did you get $2,000 from Joe Biden for that stimulus check? This is the guy he told you to vote for. We cannot continue to be misled or fooled by the Black misleadership class. Let's go to some of the comments here. XJW says, Barkley talked shit about my HBCU. He claimed my president scammed him. SMH, that man is a liar. Interesting. Thank you for the super chat. Where is the love? These Black Democratic political leaders in Congress got me F up on this Gaza issue. Disgusting. SMH. Thank you, Stu. Worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Israel is not Jews. Israel is a colonial state that constantly attacking, oppressing Palestinians. Thank you for that, Stu. At Kid says, Sabby, I saw a big freeway billboard that read, Israel is killing one school bus of children every day. I had never seen anything like that before. The times are changing 100%. Wow. That's huge, a Kid. That is huge. Thank you, New York Varsity. 12 Democrats voted against significantly cheaper drugs. One of them was Booker. Big Pharma paid him a lot. AIPAC got him for cheap. There you go. Katrina says, these lying SOBs. Be Easy says, no, it's not crazy. It's normal. 99.9% of Black politicians are buck-broken bootlickers. Joy says, like recruiting for the CIA. There you go. Robert says, Sabby, what if AIPAC approaches you with $2 million? Number one, they wouldn't. But even if they did, approach me for what? I'm not a politician. I wouldn't take money from them. I don't even take sponsorships on this channel. Like, come on. All right, guys, go ahead and smash that like button. Thank you very much. If you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. Dun, dun, dun. And we are moving on to our next story here, continuing with the Gaza issue. It seems like it was just a couple of weeks ago that we covered the flower massacre that happened in Gaza, where there was obviously trucks that came through with food, humanitarian aid for the Palestinian people. And the moment they started to approach those trucks, they were fired upon, right? Now, of course, we know the IDF told a different story. The story that they told said that they were shooting up in the air, actually, not at the people. Well, believe it or not, CNN actually conducted their own investigation. I know, is wild. But this is the second time I've seen them conduct their own investigation in reference to the assault on Gaza. And what they have found is that, surprise, surprise, it appears that the IDF lied about the flower massacre. Why are we not surprised? Let's get into this clip here from CNN. Again, it says CNN investigation, new video, eyewitness testimony contradicts Israel's explanation of 100 plus who died in Gaza and the truck incident. Let's start here. This is the Aaron Burnett Out Front show.
It was the IDF that was then responsible for safely delivering these vital supplies. But we found they opened fire on unarmed, starving Palestinians at close range as the aid arrived. Their explanation for the tragedy using this drone video was a stampede that caused soldiers to fire warning shots in the air. They later admitted to firing some shots directly at so-called suspects who approached them. But the IDF footage is incomplete. It cuts between crowds surrounding the trucks and bodies lying on the ground.
That's right. So we've seen incomplete footage from the IDF before. I think one of the times we saw that was when they were actually following IDF soldiers through Al-Shifa Hospital. Remember that? And they were saying, look at what we found in this hospital. Look at these weapons, da-da-da. And it's interesting, like the way that it was done, it looked like someone just placed those things there. Like it just looked like it was scripted, right? And it also looked like it was edited, which it appears those things were admitted later on. There were lies that were told about a calendar that was on the wall. Remember that one that Mehdi Hassan caught and he actually called out, hence why he's no longer at MSNBC. But this is not the first time that the IDF has been known to alter footage to fit their narrative.
Even this reveals they were firing in a densely packed area, likely to cause severe bloodshed. CNN requested the full footage from the IDF, but it was denied. Jihad Abu Watfa was amongst the starving Palestinians and started filming as the
We're going to take this part off here because I can't show that part. Sorry, guys. We'll just go a little bit forward right here when he says that we faced danger. Yeah, we'll start it right about there. There we go.
من أجل الحصول على أي لقمة عيش لعائلاتنا.
Videos from Jihad and another key
and we'll have to come out of here too. Sorry, guys. I wish they didn't do them all this way, but we'll start with the timeline here. So then we get to the timeline of the events that took place that night.
published this timeline saying the trucks arrived at the checkpoint at 4 a.m. They then crossed at 4:29, and only after that did the IDF fire shots at the crowd.
We'll move that here. And then we'll go forward past that. So we're just going to speed up just a little bit. Okay. Because he was actually there that night. Sorry about that, guys. There you go.
جدا لا يوصف من خوف واستباك وخايف لا سمح الله ترجع لأهلك شهيد.
As day broke, the number of dead and injured that emerged was staggering. Interviews with survivors at hospitals afterwards found some people had been shot in the upper body.
Yeah, so he was another one that was wounded. We're going to speed up here. And we're going to talk to this guy about the food delivery.
Via WhatsApp.
I woke up to some photos with cardboard boxes of our logo, my welfare trust, with bloodstains on them. And it came as a shock. This is the first time in 20 years where I've actually seen blood being mixed with aid.
In all, at least 118 died that day. With the UN struggling to access northern Gaza, the IDF are responsible for ensuring aid arrives safely. Despite this, the UN has documented 24 attacks on Palestinians awaiting aid in the last 3 months alone.
And then we want to go to this last part here. Yeah, when they wrap up here. And then I want to show you the article because it goes a little bit deeper.
Well, Aaron, the IDF have not yet responded to CNN's questions on these findings. We've also asked for that full unedited drone footage, but those requests have been denied. And really, this investigation is calling into question the IDF's ability to safely distribute aid when it's clearly most desperately needed.
So you hear that? So this is the second time they've conducted an investigation, their own investigation, and they have found that the IDF has not been honest. Now, I want to give a little bit more detail here in the article. So it goes on to say here, dying for a bag of flour, videos and eyewitness accounts cast doubt on Israel's timeline of deadly Gaza aid delivery. Let's go down to this part here. So this is Jihad. This was the guy who was on the video. It says the 27-year-old surrounded by hundreds of other Palestinians who had gathered for aid delivery on February 29th when Israeli soldiers accompanying the humanitarian convoy opened fire. More than 100 people were killed and 700 injured, according to Gaza's health ministry. The tragedy, which has become known among Palestinians as the Flower Massacre, is one of the single deadliest mass casualty events to take place in Gaza since Israel launched its assault on the Gaza Strip following October 7th. Look at this. Notice how they're changing their vocabulary. Notice they're now saying Israel launched its assault. Everyone pay attention to that, because that's not what they were referring to before. They weren't calling it that. Again, that comes from pressure from the masses, people outside. It says CNN collected testimonies and videos of 22 eyewitnesses, many of whom had traveled from other cities across Gaza in hopes of finding something for their families to eat. When the convoy passed through an Israeli checkpoint on al-Rashid Street, the main north-south route designated by the Israeli military for humanitarian aid. Survivors recalled Israeli troops opening fire on crowds as they tried desperately to reach the food aid. So that is recapping what happened there. But now we face another situation where I don't know if you guys heard about this, but now a UNICEF convoy has also been hit by gunfire waiting to enter northern Gaza. So this is after the Flower Massacre. This actually happened, I believe, yesterday. Let's go ahead and bring this in. You see what I mean about not holding Israel accountable? Notice how they can just change the footage to make it fit their narrative, and there's no accountability. No one's holding Israel accountable. And now you see more casualties are happening, this time to more humanitarian workers.
UNICEF, the UN agency that helps children, says one of its vehicles came under fire on Wednesday while waiting to enter northern Gaza. Thankfully, no one was injured. Here's UNICEF's Tess Ingram, who joins us in just a moment and was part of that convoy.
Active shooting broke out in the area. Our car was hit by a few bullets. We've just got back and there's some pretty clear bullet hits here and another one here along the window and a few others.
This came 10 days after 7 aid workers with World Central Kitchen were killed in what Israeli officials call a mistakenly targeted military strike. Aid agencies are reporting dire needs in Gaza, and yesterday on Capitol Hill, Samantha Power, America's top humanitarian official, said yes when asked if famine was already occurring in Gaza. UNICEF's Tess Ingram joins me now with more. Tess, it's good to have you. Can you walk us through what exactly happened? As I understand it, you were on a coordinated aid mission yesterday in northern Gaza. What happened next?
So, as you say, it was a coordinated mission. We'd planned in advance. We have UNRWA and UNICEF colleagues together trying to bring nutrition supplies, medical supplies, and 10,000 litres of fuel for water points in the north of Gaza. We travel north. We're heading towards the Wadi Gaza checkpoint when we're instructed to hold at a waiting area, which is just south of the checkpoint. And this is a designated area where UN convoys often have to wait. While we're there, gunfire breaks out in the vicinity. It seemed to be coming from the direction of the checkpoint from the north, and it seemed to be aimed at civilians who were in the area, who then turned and ran away from the checkpoint.
So did you guys hear what she said? This is really important. So now you have someone with UNICEF saying that they were aiming at the civilians, and the direction it was coming from was the checkpoint. So here you go again. This is another eyewitness account that is saying they were aiming at civilians. I don't know how many more eyewitnesses they need to come forward for these other countries. Let's say the United States doesn't bend the knee, okay? But all these other countries that are Western allies, I don't know how many more witnesses that they need for the other countries to pull back and say, no, enough is enough.
We were just to the west of them. We were 3 cars and 2 trucks. And one of our cars, the car that I was in, was hit by 3 bullets, 2 on my door, 1 on the window and 1 on the door, and 1 on the hood of the car. So this is obviously an incident that should not be happening on a coordinated mission in a designated area where we have been instructed to wait, let alone at all, Jim.
So she followed instructions and it was a designated area. So once again, this proves that they are trying to prevent the food and the aid from getting in.
I wonder, in those circumstances, you coordinate in advance, so you're communicating with the IDF. They know where you're going, why you're going there. You stay in the designated areas. In the midst of this gunfire, did you have any ability to call the IDF and say, hey, wait a second, we're caught in the middle of this?
The lead convoy was an UNRWA vehicle, and our security colleagues at the front there, I know that they were in contact with Israel during this incident or in the wake of it. I'm not sure if they were able to do it immediately during the fire because it was so sudden and quite rapid.
Also, I didn't like the way he framed that question. You should change your framing. What do you mean did she try to call the IDF and let them know that this is the UNICEF truck? The point that needs to be made is that they shouldn't have been targeting at civilians in a designated area in the first place. That's the point that needs to be made. Why are you asking her if she tried to call or contact them? This isn't on her. This isn't on the civilians that were in that area. It was designated for aid, and they are still firing upon people that are in spots that are designated for aid. So don't put this back on the person that was attacked. Put the accountability on the attacker.
Has the IDF reached out, provided any explanation as to what happened here, or responded to your questions?
No, UNICEF and other parties in the UN have reached out to the relevant Israeli authorities, but we're yet to receive a response. And the response that we're really seeking, Jim, is that this won't happen again. Just 7-8 days after the World Central Kitchen incident, to have something like this happen when the dialogue has been so much about preventing incidents like this, especially on coordinated missions, that's what we're after.
We just talked about this. We just talked about what happened with the World Central Kitchen. We're not even a month later.
Spoke to you last week, just after that deadly strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy. I asked you if you trusted then the IDF's pronouncements that it would keep aid convoys safe. You told me then you didn't, and I wonder how you feel now following this incident.
Look, I think that it's clear that the system that is meant to protect humanitarian aid workers in the Gaza Strip is very broken. And what we need is that system to be repaired with urgency so that more incidents like this don't keep happening, not just to us, but to civilians as well.
Have there been any changes in the last week? Because I spoke with senior IDF officials as well in the wake of the World Central Kitchen attack. They said the changes were coming, right? They acknowledged responsibility. They said changes were coming. There's some discussion of putting this reflective tape on the vehicles of aid convoys so it could be easily spotted from the air. Have you seen any measures like that?
What kind of question would you ask someone who was just shot at? Obviously, if they were shooting at her, obviously there's no change. Like this woman is literally, someone said in the chat, this woman is lucky to be alive. I
can't speak for the whole UN or humanitarian community, but at UNICEF, no, we haven't seen a difference. We don't have that tape on our vehicles. We had this mission that was coordinated, and we still ran into this dangerous incident and extended delays that ultimately prevented us from completing the mission and taking these important life-saving supplies to the children that need them. So no, we haven't seen change yet, and it's really needed urgently to make sure that hopefully as more trucks come in, as has been promised, that we're able to distribute that, because these two things really go hand in hand, the delivery and the distribution.
No question. So before we go, you mentioned that aid. What happens to that aid? Will it get delivered?
We're hoping so. Despite the incident, we're going to try again, hopefully this weekend. We're putting in another coordination request because it's just too important to give up. We've got treatment that we know can help the malnourished children in the north of Gaza, and we desperately want to get it up there.
Isn't that really sad what you just heard right there? Like, this woman was just shot at and she's going to have to try to do it again. So she's willing to risk her life to save those kids, to get them the nutrients that they need. And I just, it baffles me, because again, this is where people should be calling on the president of the United States to really do something here. But he's not willing to, because he's also bought and paid for by AIPAC. This is what happens when you pledge your allegiance to another state, another country. This is what happens when you pledge your allegiance to an organization like AIPAC, to the Israeli lobby. Like, this is crazy, and this is insane. I hope more people share this story. We're not even a month out from the World Central Kitchen attack on those humanitarian workers. We're not even a month away from that. And here's another humanitarian worker that was attacked. So yes, she is lucky to be alive. But the IDF has been lying. They continue to lie. And I think we all know how that goes. Let's go to some of the comments here. Urban Voice Media, Sabby, thank you for the APAC tracker info. We are about to get busy with this. You are welcome, fam. Thank you for the super chat, EMK. May the voices of peace rise so loudly that the war criminals cannot avoid their sins and accountability. Well said. I'll get the comment on Rockfin and then we'll move on to our final story. Thank you for the tip on Rockfin, Skip. Warnock sold out the Jesus he claims to worship and work for. There you go. That's right. And thank you so much, New York Varsity Sports, for the super chat. So if the IDF says you are not being shot at, that bullet that grazed your behind was all in your mind? Apparently so. All right, guys. One more story left for you. Go ahead and smash the like button. And if you're new, don't forget to like, sub, and share. We got to get into this Tucker Carlson story. So Tucker Carlson actually interviewed a Christian leader here, Palestinian Christian leader. And I got to tell you, for the first time, it is not the left that is coming after Tucker Carlson. It's actually people on the right. And that goes back to the poll question. If you have a chance, don't forget to answer that. That poll should be there, right, Eric? Yeah, that poll question should be there. Whether or not you think that this issue with Israel, is it dividing the right? So that's something we need to think about. So Tucker Carlson did this interview and he received numerous attacks from people on the right. And now he is being labeled as anti-Semitic, just like Candace Owen. Oh my God. I can't make this up. Let me go ahead and get into this. This was episode 91. How does the government of Israel treat Christians? So Tucker Carlson decided to take a different approach with this, not necessarily focusing on the babies, the children being killed, but religion. Let's dive in.
But again, how are the Christians doing in that region, in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Israel proper? We almost never hear from them. And so we thought it would be interesting and maybe edifying to hear from one right now. The Reverend Munther Ishak is the pastor at the Evangelical Lutheran Christian Church in Bethlehem, and we're honored to have him join us. Father Ishak, thank you very much for coming on. So let me just ask you a broad question to start. How are Christians in the Holy Land, in the three places I mentioned, West Bank, Israel proper, and Gaza, how are they doing right now?
Yeah, first, thank you for having me. These are very, very difficult times, and it's been difficult for quite some time now. When I say difficult times, I'm not just only referring to October 7th, and the fact that right now we are fragmented into as you explained, three territories, the West Bank, Gaza, and Israel proper. We can add East Jerusalem, which is a category in its own, explain one element of our situation, which is we're fragmented. So in my church, I have family members with relatives in Gaza, and they cannot even visit. Before the war, they could not visit and be with them. And this fragmentation is, as I said, one element of the situation. One of the biggest problems we're facing right now is the deterioration in our number.
Pause right there. Okay, we're going to come back to this because I want to show you those numbers. I want you to see those for yourself. One of the problems that they have is the deterioration of the numbers. So let me show you the numbers. Check this out. Shout out to Daniel for sharing this here. Israel by the numbers in reference to religion, Christians as percentage of the population. This is the Exodus here. If you look at Israel, which is more like I don't want to call it turquoise, but I don't know what we want to call this color, but a milder green. Israel, and if you want to look at the number Christians from 1900, and then I believe this is going all the way over to 2025, right? So, am I looking at that right? Yeah, 1900 or 1900. Okay. So as you can see, if you look at when it comes to the number of Christians in Israel, notice you see the Christian population has dramatically decreased. In fact, Syria, Egypt, Palestine, Israel, Iraq, UAE all have decreased in reference to the Christian population. Excuse me, I said this backwards. Syria, Egypt, Palestine, Israel, and Iraq have decreased in reference to the Christian population. The UAE has increased its Christian population, and Saudi Arabia has increased its Christian population. But that's what he means when he says, if you look at this by the numbers. So shout out to Daniel, who shared that the population is growing in the UAE and Saudi Arabia. That also makes sense. Like I said, the United States has good relations with the UAE and Saudi Arabia, so I could see that happening. But to his point, you can see that decrease there. I also thought it was interesting that he said even prior to October 7th, his family members could not visit him. So keep that in mind. Let's get back in.
People keep leaving because of the political reality. Life under a very harsh Israeli military occupation is difficult to bear. And as a result, many young Palestinian Christians continue to leave, for example, Bethlehem, choosing to find a better and easier life elsewhere. We are a small community, but we're part of the Palestinian people. And as such, anything that happens to Palestinian happens to us. We are probably disproportionately affected by all of this because of our small numbers as a religious community.
So think about what he's telling you. So the reason why their population is decreasing, the Christian population, is because of the military occupation of the IDF, the harsh realities living under that, right? So it's not just in reference to Palestinians that are Muslim. They still target Christians as well. In fact, there have been videos that I've seen on social media of other Christians that went to visit and were also targeted, so, but here we are.
Anything that happens impacts us severely. Case in point, what's happening in Gaza right now, where there are anything between 800 to 900 Palestinian Christians, and any impact on that community, any death in that community will have a long-lasting effect.
So what sort of support have you had from the Christians in the U.S. Congress? And just to frame this, and of course, people know this already, but the United States government is paying for a lot of these military operations, and this is a majority Christian country. So have any members of Congress sent you aid of any kind, words of support, a fellow Christian?
We've always had a problem with American foreign policy when it comes to Palestine, Israel, and the Middle East in general. I've traveled to DC in December to advocate for a ceasefire. I don't think war solves anything. And no, I mean, on the opposite, we continue to be horrified by what we hear from Congress, with, of course, some exceptions. There are some on the Democratic side. Of course, Rashida Tlaib comes from a Palestinian heritage. But when you look at the so-called religious right, we receive no sympathy whatsoever. Sometimes we just plead to be heard and to have our perspective taken seriously.
So this is another thing that I have brought up before, right? So what Tucker Carlson did was actually really smart, because while most of us have focused on the ethnic cleansing, Tucker Carlson is kind of like, well, how can I get that message across to the base that I have? So what Tucker Carlson is doing, in order to appeal to his base, he is focusing on the religious issue. So he's focusing on Christianity, which, particularly a lot of Christians, may watch Tucker Carlson or are more likely to be on the right. Now, or at least his base is more likely to be on the right. Now, why is that important? Because, if you say that you're a Christian and if you believe in the Bible and you believe in being able to practice your faith of Christianity, and now you see that the state of Israel is not treating Christians well, now this moves beyond just the Palestinian people. Now this moves into, okay, this is how they feel about Christians too. So now you got a lot of people who are Christian Zionists that are like, wait a minute here, right? So Zionism is losing its hold. It is starting to wrinkle. It's not completely falling apart yet. So let's not get there, but it is losing its hold because now it's not just people on the left. First, they said people on the left were in the streets protesting against the state of Israel. So it was easier for, let's just get the right to attack the left. But then people saw the images of the children. And there are moms on the left and the right and in the center. And so the children dying didn't sit too well with a lot of the moms. So there's that. Then now you have the religious issue. So now that there is this interview that took place, now you have people on the right who are Christian. And now they're like, wait a minute now. They're treating Christians this way too. So now you have this divide. And think about this, folks. This all started because the Daily Wire fired Candace Owens. Would we be here if it wasn't for the Daily Wire firing Candace Owens, accusing her of being anti-Semitic, telling her, no, you can't have free speech when they were supposed to be a free speech platform? That is how we got here. So it was because of Candace Owens getting fired. Let's continue.
And one of the things I'm often struck with, whether when I speak to diplomats, politicians, Congress staff, or even pastors and influential pastors, is how little they know about the reality on the ground. And their knowledge of the situation here seems to be very, very shallow. Yet they hold very strong opinions. And oftentimes these opinions are shaped by political parties' position, the United States position, and not really based on, a learned opinion that's based on facts, on being here, visiting, talking, investigating, and knowing the facts. And to me, the problem with all of that is it comes across with very strong opinions and decisions that impact our lives. Many times I wish to tell not just the congressmen, but the pastors themselves who support them, do you know that your lobbying, your positions, even your sermons have direct consequences on our lives? Tucker, in this war, there was pastors who openly called, for example, to turn Gaza into a parking lot. Now, let's remember, there are not just, the many innocent people, the majority of, Gaza people, civilians, innocent children, but also there are our siblings in Christ. We have relatives and friends in Gaza, and here you have a pastor with influence calling for the total destruction of Gaza. And you definitely, you heard in the beginning the segment from Congressman Wahlberg, who is previously a pastor, went to prestigious evangelical institutes, and it makes us wonder, this obsession with love and with war, this obsession with war and violence, it's the antithesis of everything that Jesus taught. And at the same time, it again makes us wonder, do you realize how damaging that is for us Christians living not just in Palestine, but in the Middle East? Damaging in the sense of real impact on our lives, but also damaging in terms of our credibility in front of our peers here in the Middle East. So we've always had a very serious problem when it comes to American foreign policy and the religious right to support to that foreign policy when it comes to Palestine and Israel.
So there it is. What did he tell you? American foreign policy has always been an issue, even for Christians in Israel. Now we're going to fast forward to another part here, because there's another piece that I want to get to where they dive a little bit deeper here. We go ahead and share this. And I got to tell you, this says something, because now it's like, wait a minute, bam. Okay, because now you have right-wing Christians that are like, wait a minute. Now we're finding out they're coming after us too. Because remember, a lot of people weren't aware of what was happening in Israel. They weren't aware of what was happening to the Palestinian people. They damn sure weren't aware of what was happening to Christians. I told you about how they sterilized Ethiopian Jewish women against their own will. And like the Guardian wrote about that. There was entire articles about it. Most people never heard about it. Never heard about it. So let's dive into this part here.
And so around 4 or 5 of our Palestinian Christian community inside the church died because of sickness, most likely because there is no medical attention or medicine whatsoever. You can go to a hospital. It's literally hell on earth for them right now, even for those hiding inside the two churches.
I'm confused. Why wouldn't Christians in Gaza, cowering in their church and dying of curable illnesses, be allowed to travel into Israel? Why wouldn't they be allowed to leave? Why would they be held there? I mean, they're Christians. They're not a threat to anyone.
Because it is a supremacist state. They want one religion. They want one ethnicity. That's why. So you see, this interview that Tucker Carlson did with this pastor, this was a wake-up call for, I think, a lot of Christians on the right were like, wait a minute. Hold the phone. Hold the phone. Because now they see it's not just Israel trying to defend itself from Hamas. Are they trying to defend themselves from these Christians? Are they trying to defend themselves from this pastor? So Tucker Carlson stepped on some toes with this one.
No, but this is the nature of the siege. The siege has been there since 2007. It's collective punishment against all Palestinians. I think this is one of the misconceptions that Israel as if favors Christians against Muslims. No, Israel looks at us as Palestinians. I want to draw attention to, even 2 years ago in the West Bank when Palestinian Christian journalist Shireen Abu Akleh, who's also an American citizen, was shot dead by Israeli forces, and no one was held accountable. So,
pause there for a second. So you know what this exposes as well, ladies and gentlemen? He said, no, it doesn't matter because they don't just see us as Christians or, That's why he said, why would they do that towards Christians? He's like, because it doesn't matter. We're still Palestinian. Oh, and then there's another thing we got to talk about. The fact that even with the switch and let's focus on Christianity being attacked in the state of Israel, that is still identity politics. So think about that, folks. This is what I continue to tell you. Identity politics exists on both sides, whether it's religion, race, class, gender, socioeconomic status. It exists on both sides of the aisle. And it's just that both sides use different identities that they want to focus on. So when people tell you, don't talk about identity politics, all politics is identity politics. This conversation is the identity politics is focused on religion. It's focused on Christianity. But he had to bring it back there and let Tucker know it doesn't matter what the religion is. We're still Palestinian. They want us gone. So now he gets into the conversation about the West Bank.
Palestinian Christians suffer from everything under this brutal occupation, whether in Gaza, which is more difficult than here in the West Bank. But even here in the West Bank, we go through everything from land confiscation to the restrictions. And so that Christian community in Gaza right now is stuck inside. They can't leave. No one can leave Gaza right now unless, you have some sort of arrangement with the Egyptian government in Rafah. But as I said, the majority of Christians have decided to stay in the city of Gaza. So this goes back to the fragmentation I mentioned. Remember, I said we have relatives of our church members in Gaza. Well, they haven't seen each other for a while now because you need a permit from the Israeli military, even as a Christian, to travel from one place to the other. Tucker, we're talking to you from Bethlehem, and Jerusalem is literally 15 minutes away from here. I can walk to Jerusalem in 30 minutes. I can be at the old city of Jerusalem in probably 40 minutes walk. I can't get there, even as a clergy. I don't have a permit, and I need a permit that we get from the Israeli military as Palestinians to go from one place to the other. So for me as a clergy from Bethlehem, I cannot even go to Jerusalem. This is our reality today.
And that's what I've been trying to explain to people. And Kim Iverson explained this when she actually went to the West Bank as well. Imagine like those of you that live in California. Imagine if you live in Los Angeles and you want to go to San Diego. Actually, let's not go that far. Let's say you live in Hollywood. And let's say you want to go to the Valley. Imagine if you couldn't do that unless you had a special passport. Those of you that live in the Boston area, imagine if you live in Boston and you want to go to Cambridge. Just a hop, skip, and a jump away. But you couldn't do it unless you had a certain type of passport. That's how wild that is. The fact that there's a 15-minute difference there from what he was talking about. That's how crazy it is. We'll go on a little bit more here, and I'll show you the backlash that Tucker is receiving.
As a minister, so it's just hard to believe we would send any money to a government that would do something like that to Christians. So let me just ask, having been to Bethlehem, I was surprised by how hard it was to get there, and surprised, honestly, by how shabby it was. And I was surprised because I think millions of Christian pilgrims from the West go there every year because, of course, that's the birthplace of Christ. And the Church of the Nativity is there. So why isn't Bethlehem the recipient of aid from Christian groups in the West? Or more aid, enough aid?
We do receive some aid, but it's not enough. And by the way, it's nothing in comparison to the aid Israel receives.
That's right. See, once again, what he is showing you, even when it comes to Bethlehem, they are prioritizing giving more aid and funding to the state of Israel. This is just another example. Again, he's Christian. He's not Muslim. He's not Hamas. He's not, you see what I mean? So this is where the Israeli argument fails. This is where it fails. The funny part about this conversation is then Tucker said he went to Bethlehem and it was shabby. And I was thinking to myself, like, he was probably like, what in the, oh, so I'm rolling up in the hood. That's what he probably thought. He was like, I did not know this place looked like this.
That's the interesting part in all of this. And I would love to reach a point in which we don't actually need any aid. If Bethlehem was open to the world, we can flourish as a community, not just from tourism and obviously the pilgrimage. The Palestinian people are very creative, very talented. We can do much if we have the opportunity to flourish as a community. But you does something important because we as Palestinian Christians, I think, rely too much on tourism and on welcoming pilgrimage. Before COVID, we had record numbers of pilgrims staying in Bethlehem. The economy was, especially in Bethlehem, was really going up. But then COVID hit us. And now this war hit us, and I'm not sure it's going to be very easy for us to survive. And when it comes to support, not just I wish to reach the point where we don't need support because Bethlehem is open to the world. I want to emphasize that the biggest support right now that we're asking for is not financial, but on political advocacy for peace. And for a solution, whether it be a two-state solution or any other solution. We will not survive as a Christian community if the situation of Palestinians in general is not solved.
And I want to leave it on that note there because that sends a message to Christians that are part of Tucker Carlson's audience. And I'm pretty sure they heard that loud and clear. There's a number of comments on Twitter under this video. The people are pissed. Some of them are pissed at Tucker Carlson for doing this interview, but I felt like there were more of them that were pissed that this is happening to people who are Christian. So it really does put the ball, in the court of different people now. So now you can't just say it's the left that is angry with the state of Israel. Now you have right-wing Christians that are angry with the state of Israel. This is called bipartisanship in the streets. Now you can have bipartisanship in the streets among the people, not the people in the stuffy suits that sit in DC and make legislation. You have Rabbi Shmuley, who came out against Tucker Carlson, of course. I've said for years that Tucker Carlson is an anti-Semite, while everyone else was cheering him on Fox News each night. I said he's an Israel hater. Now he shows his true colors. Kudos to the Murdoch family for firing him and relegating him to the fringes of the media. See this, guys? It's already begun. From Candace Owens to Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson says you've lost the thread to U.S. Christian leaders who support Israel. Here it comes, folks. I told you, here it comes. They have turned on him. And it even says so here, conservatives turn on Tucker Carlson. This was from Newsweek. Oh my God. I got to tell you, we're going to get started here. It says former Fox host Tucker Carlson added his voice to criticism of Israel on the latest episode of his talk show, where he spoke with a Palestinian pastor about how the conflict has affected the region's small Christian population. Goes on to say here, after citing wars in other regions, Carlson asked, but what about Gaza? What about the entire region in the Middle East, where, of course, there's very intense fighting going on? Many Christian churches in the United States, particularly evangelical churches, support that. It goes on to say here, but there is virtually never a word about Christians who live there, the ancient Christian community in Gaza, the West Bank, and Israel proper. So because no one has said a word, there has been great suffering among the Christian population in that region. So Tucker Carlson is late with this news, because when it says no one has said a word, there have been people on the left who actually have been talking about this for quite some time. Max Blumenthal's talked about this. Anya Parampil's talked about this. Kim Iverson talked about this after she went to visit the West Bank a couple of years ago. So there have been people that have, I think Kim Iverson's independent now, but there have been people that did cover this. It was just covered by people on the left at that point in time, right? So, but there are more attacks coming Tucker Carlson's way, and they show some of those here. Caroline Glick, this is mendacious hit piece that shows Tucker's generally well-hidden hand. The Christian population of Bethlehem all but disappeared after the PLA took over in 1996 due to Islamic persecution. The only Christian population in the Middle East that is growing is the Christian, see if she still got this here, is the Christian community in Israel. The Christian community in Gaza disappeared after Hamas took over in 2005. In 2002, PLO terrorists took nuns and priests and hostages in a standoff with the IDF forces in the Church of the Nativity of Bethlehem. So they coming after him, right? And they send the alarm. The network of Zionists sound the alarm, and they all attack you one after another. Josh Hammer. Turns out Tucker needed Fox more than Fox needed Tucker. Very sad. Oh my God. Now, Jake Shields came in with good commentary here in reference to the interview. Tucker Carlson is actually America first. Unfortunately, all of our Republicans are Israel first, and Democrats are Ukraine and every third world nation first. And it has the statement here where Tucker Carlson says, America does not exist to protect and stand up for the citizens of other nations. So now you have Zionists coming after Candace Owens. You got Zionists coming after Tucker Carlson. You guys keep saying that you want some type of unity in reference to fighting back against Israel. Well, here's your unity. Here's your unity ticket, because now they have pissed off right-wing Christians and Tucker Carlson. I don't know if Tucker considers himself Christian, but Tucker Carlson, Candace Owens. Remember, all of this started because the Daily Wire decided to fire Candace Owens, and this has spiraled into a big snowball. So now Zionists have people on the left and people on the right who are angry with them. But do you think that Israel has now divided the right? Let's check out the poll. This was pinned to the top of the chat. 1,166 votes. Do you feel Israel is now dividing the right? 58% of you say yes, 16% say no, and 25% say that you are not sure. Interesting numbers there, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go to some of the comments here in the chat. Be Easy says religion, i.e. identity politics. Yep. I told you guys, identity politics isn't just race and gender. Child of God says Tucker destroyed a whole narrative in one interview. That's like 20 years of work down the drain for them in an hour. They definitely mad. Thank you for the super chat, P. Smith. Gray Zone video, unholy occupation. I have to check that out. Thank you. Jonathan says, Sabby, you should interview Candace Owen. You are probably like the 10th person to tell me this within the past 2 weeks. I'm open to having conversation with anybody. I think that would be a really interesting conversation. That would be a trip. That'd be one for the history books. But I am not certain that she would want to have a conversation on a smaller channel. Hani says, Sabby, thank you for reporting the truth. And Gina says, Sabby Sabs, yes, he's a former Episcopalian who says he's not that denim anymore, but still, he's not that denomination anymore, but still Christian. Interesting. I've never met an Episcopalian. Let's take the comments on Rockfin, Eric. Thank you so much for the tip on Rockfin hemp car. Catholic priests get spit on in Jerusalem on a regular basis. Yeah, I've seen that article. It says there's a video of a show that's nailing Jesus to the cross and they're mocking him. We've killed white Christians in the Balkans and Christians in East Timor and the Americas. Cuba is 60% Catholic, Venezuela too. And thank you for the tip, Skip. All Christian folk ain't kin folk, just like all Jewish folks ain't kin folks, and all skin folk ain't kin folks either. This is true. Thank you for this one, Hemp. Don't forget, we shot St. Father Romero through the heart with an exploding round as he was consecrating the host in El Salvador. The actor who played the dad in the Addams Family played him in a movie about it. We tortured Sister Diana Ortiz too. The book Disturbing the Peace about Father Roy Bourgeois is a must read. He tried to close the School of Americas. Susan Sarandon did a movie on it. I'll have to check that out. I'm not familiar with that. I'll have to look into it. Guys, I will be live this Sunday. Don't miss that. Got a special guest. Come check it out. Sunday, 5 p.m. ET, Chris Hedges is coming back to the show. We have quite a bit to discuss considering the fact that he was in the UK for the Julian Assange hearing. So he's probably going to provide some information about that. I know he was going to try to go visit Julian Assange again recently after that decision was made. I'm not sure if he was able to do that or not, but we'll find out more info when he comes on Sunday. I'm also going to talk to him more about Israel and Gaza, particularly since Chris has been in the region. He was actually recently in Egypt as well. So we're going to get some more information from Chris while we can get him, because he is very, very busy person. Chris Hedges is probably one of the busiest people on the left, right? Him and Professor Richard Wolff. They are very busy people. So Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern time, Chris Hedges will be here, and we're going to cover this breaking news that came out about AOC and funding. Not looking good for AOC when a liberal outlet is actually calling her out. So we're going to dive into that. Other than that, guys, I think that's about it. Thank you for the super sticker, Cooper. Thank you so much. And we are out of here, guys. I hope you have a great weekend. See you Sunday. Have a good night. Keep up the fight.